Hello, we're a group of medical students, and we're so excited about today's Science Saturday presentation. We're here to tell you about our efforts as students toward rare disease. Just to start, if all of the people in a world with a rare disease formed a country, it would be the world's third most populous country. There are 30 million patients in the United States and additional 30 million in the UK living with rare diseases. Just looking at rare diseases in total, there are roughly 7,000 of them that have been identified. 50% of rare disease patients are children. And part of the reason why we want to work so hard to address rare disease is that even though individual rare diseases are rare, rare is everywhere. In fact, 3 to 10% of hospitalizations relate to rare disease. Despite this, 95% of rare diseases have absolutely no FDA-approved treatment, and they're diagnosed often 6 to 8 years after presenting. That is far too long. We believe that as medical students, part of the problem starts with the way that we're trained. This is a survey that we at the University of Pennsylvania conducted, and about 1/3 of medical students agree that medical education as a whole does not spend enough time teaching us about rare diseases. We aim to fix this. We're a group of medical students who have formed a number of organizations that are dedicated to addressing rare disease. And our mission is centered around the idea that when you hear hoofbeats, sometimes it is in fact a zebra.
So hello everyone, and thank you so much, Vinay, for the introduction. So as just some further information about us. So we're the Rare Disease Interest Group at McGill University. And so I'll be going over a few of our initiatives as a whole about what students are doing to raise awareness for rare diseases. So like Vinay said, we are a student group from McGill University originally, founded in 2017 by medical students. And in Canada, we were the first student-run rare advocacy group. And so our goals have been to shape a generation of physicians to raise awareness for rare diseases among medical students and allied health professions. And really, we want to give a platform to people with rare diseases. And really, we aim to do this by delivering some thought-provoking events and to work interdisciplinarily with our collaborators like at UPenn and Johns Hopkins and many more. You can find more information on the website linked here. So some examples of our activities. So we really try to take a holistic approach to raise awareness and advocate for rare diseases. And for example, we do this through our Rare Disease Day, where we have collaborators from all walks of life, patients, their families, and researchers and experts to come and discuss the current events and current news related to rare diseases and what needs to be done to improve awareness for these diseases. Also have patient perspective series where we try to get the story from the patient's view and really focus on the human behind these diseases to understand that this isn't just something to be studied from a textbook, but there is really a story and a lot of real personal experiences that underlie having a rare disease. So those are just some of the events that we have, and there are many, many more. So we're very encouraged to make a more just healthcare system by, encouraging and promoting the values and being advocates for those who have rare diseases.
Hello again. We are the Rare Disease Interest Group at the University of Pennsylvania, and we owe a lot of our existence to the group at McGill University, which was really what sort of set a lot of what we do in motion. Our goals are to raise awareness about rare diseases within the University of Pennsylvania, as well as to create a community for rare disease advocacy and better prepare our students to treat adult and pediatric patients with rare disease. There are a number of different projects that we have ongoing to help us do this. One of them is a database that is specifically designed to help patients connect with physicians within the University of Pennsylvania system by allowing them to look up who within the university is working on the rare disease that they're living with. The second thing is to make information about rare diseases more accessible by translating information sources into various different languages. And lastly, we're building a social media campaign that's based around rare diseases to extend our outreach beyond the University of Pennsylvania community.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yuna, and I'm a second-year medical student and one of the members of the Rare Disease Interest Group at Johns Hopkins. Our club was approved just a few months ago, making us a relatively new addition to the Rare Disease Interest Group family. We are so excited to spread awareness about rare diseases among our classmates and broader community.
And my name is Harisa. I'm a fourth-year medical student at Hopkins and was with Una as we formed this brand new club at our school. Ongoing projects we have are very similar to the ones that have already been mentioned, and this includes creating a rare diseases research database for first-year scholarly concentration projects, which all first years do. We also hope to work with faculty members to include more clinical correlations in our curriculum. And then lastly, we hope to help with the social media outreach that the other schools are doing as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Dominique Lessard here with Dr. Kimberly Steele. And today we're going to be sharing a little bit with you about how this collaborative Science Saturday initiative between two very different clinical communities on paper came to be. So for a little bit of background from the KIF1A.org perspective, Science Saturday is a weekly initiative that we put out, typically in the form of a blog post, in which we're sharing updates of our KIF1A and CAN community about recent advancements in KIF1A research, recent developments in the rare disease world, rare disease news, therapeutic development, in a way that we can communicate this information in a very palpable lay English way to keep our community as informed as possible about their disorder and all of the activities surrounding their disorder in their community. And like many of our initiatives at KIF1A.org, we are fierce believers in collaboration and open science. And any sort of platform that we put out there, we want to serve as a model for any rare disease organization that may benefit from adapting or replicating that model as well. And so one day I had a wonderful exchange with Dr. Steele on Twitter about potentially creating this collaborative experience. And I'll let Dr. Steele give her perspective about how we came together today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lessard. And it's wonderful to be here with you. And this is an exciting project. As a mom of a child with an ultra rare disease and a clinician scientist, when this experience started, I really felt like I was on an island and there was not too many people there to help. And I thought about it as, wow, if I'm experiencing this, what are parents and families experiencing when they don't have that opportunity to have the medical background? They don't have that. And so when I got into the rare disease space and had this amazing opportunity to be part of the Rare as One DZI initiative, I met incredible 29 other network foundations and learned so much from everyone. And one of those things was from KIF1A and Dr. Lessard. I saw her on the website and on videos, and she was explaining things in layman's terms. And that was the aha moment, that we needed to do that for our vascular anomaly community too. And so I first asked if it's okay, and then we started Science Saturday. And then I got this amazing tweet from Dr. Lessard, and we got together and we put our heads together. And so here is our collaboration of Rare plus Rare.
We're so excited to begin presenting patients. We'll start with CLA. CLA refers to a group of disorders that affect the circulation of lymph. Although the causes of the disease are thus far unknown, there is a lot of ongoing research right now, and it points to a protein called vascular endothelial growth factor in the pathogenesis of CLA.
So next, we will begin our patient presentation on CAND. So CAND, also known as the kinesin-like protein-associated neurological disorders, are disorders associated with the KIF1A gene. And there's several mutations, over 100 different mutations identified in the KIF1A gene. And these are known as the KIF1A associated neurological disorders. And so what's known about KIF1A is that this is a gene that gives rise to a protein which is very important for the function of neurons, particularly because it's a motor protein. And what this means is that it helps to carry cargo like nutrients or waste products up and down the neuron. And as you can imagine, when there's a disorder in this protein, there are all kinds of symptoms like cognitive impairments, muscle spasms and paralysis, epilepsy, and more. So this is why this is very important disease to study. And so some of the challenges associated is the fact that it's often misdiagnosed, like many rare diseases, and there are currently no standard therapies or protocols or treatment options for this disease. So this highlights the need for much more awareness and research for different treatments for the disease.
And now I have the distinct honor of introducing supermom, Dr. Yang Zhang, parent of 8-year-old Molly, a wonderful, strong, and brave little girl currently battling KLA. Dr. Zhang, thank you so much for your willingness to share. I'm going to start by asking.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. I'm going to start by just asking you a few questions about your diagnostic journey and odyssey. What was your journey to receiving a diagnosis, and what were some of the main challenges that you faced along the way?
It's a long time ago. It's Molly's 8 years old now. I think it was just when she was turning 6 months old, and we were living in Ottawa, Canada, and I was planning for my second half of mat leave and trying to celebrate the time with my 2 children. I had one older daughter and then 2 years old, and we just found out Molly seemed to have lots of bruises all over her body. And then, we took her to the pediatrician, thought that was, just she started crawling, there's a lot of injury. And then we start finding there's a lot of bruises on her tongues. And then we thought that was teething. There's seemed kind of blood clot comes and goes. It's very kind of seems random event, and then we followed with pediatrician, but there was no really conclusion. And until one day, I was playing with her on a Saturday, I was just pulling her up and down, trying to have play, and then all of a sudden I look at the upper of her palate, it's full of bloody spot. And I happen to have a friend who is a pediatrician, and then I called her because I thought she must have a major virus. In fact, then she said, okay, bring her to the Emerge because you never know what is happening. So that was the start of our journey. We rushed to Emerge, and at Emerge, people, did a blood test and find out Molly had platelets of, I think 16, hemoglobin around 65. And, so they kept us, and that's how the process started. They called a hematologist, and, both myself and my husband sat in Emerge for 5-6 hours. And I think that was an unforgettable day because we were in disbelief.
And I mean, I can imagine that given the rarity of conditions like KLA, coming up with an accurate diagnosis is significantly challenging. How did that process look like for you?
I think that's probably one of the most challenging time in our family's life. And I think, following that emerge visit, we were given an appointment to come back to see a panel of experts, including dermatologists, hematologists, pediatrician. And then, we start thinking we're presented what are the possible causes of her symptom. Then we had met I think numerous medical students, resident, fellows. We repeat our stories again and again. People are very kind, and I think they really explore all the literature and come up with a long list of kind of differential diagnosis. Of course, for us, every day we were in the hospital every other day almost, and then I think the information, it was just extremely overwhelming. I think every time we were given a new name, and we started coming home, searching on the internet, and then we're waiting for the doctors to confirm and bring more tests if we were really a kind of candidate for that disease. It was very frustrating process, I think, lasted for almost 3 months, because it's hard to put Molly, although she has all the symptom of DIC, has all the bruises, and she was failing to thrive. It's hard for people to have a really conclusive diagnosis. I think we were really fortunate. We had a very experienced dermatologist who was retired and then came back to serve as a kind of a coach for the dermatology program at in Ottawa, a children's hospital, and he insists to take a biopsy for Molly. Although we understand that given her platelets and coagulopathy situation, it contains some risk. We proceeded with the biopsy, and then with that result come another journey of differential diagnosis. In the end, we were given a diagnosis: Molly would have a multifocal lymphangioma, endotheliomatosis with thrombocytopenia. It's called MLT disease. I never forget. But we were not fully convinced, because the MLT disease seemed to have massive GI bleeding symptoms, but our daughter didn't have any of that. And so we went home with that diagnosis. We were told that we're going to start thinking about treating bleeding disorder. But it's just not fully, we were not fully convinced. And then things just, even with, she were on high steroids, and things are not really improving so much. And so it took about another 2-3 months for one of our very young hematologists to start also questioning, is there something that we have missed? And that's where she has decided to reach out to a kind of global research community. She gathered all Molly's medical file and trying to send around. And that's where we reach out to Cincinnati and Boston, where a panel of experts start to weigh in their opinion.
I'm so inspired by what you said for a couple of reasons. First, there seems to be this really uncanny ability among parents that I've noticed with you and with a lot of the other parents I've spoken to, where you just seem to know intuitively that something doesn't match. For example, with the MLT diagnosis, I've spoken previously with Dr. Kimberly Steele, who had a similar experience, and it's I think a really powerful thing. With that, I was wondering what the role of connecting with other parents of children with similar diagnoses has been, and sort of the role of community in all of this. Because the other thing you alluded to is how, at least on the other side of the table, among medical professionals, the ability to reach out to a global community was very, very helpful.
Yeah, I think, it's absolutely instrumental in our kind of early journey of, being diagnosed, because as soon as I think Boston and Cincinnati together to come up with the diagnosis of KOA, we had some kind of form of relief, kind of know our identity, knowing, what we have, what's the potential, issues that we need to cope with. But at the same time, I think, the new level of anxiety starts because we realize there isn't any, global standard or from the industry that kind of grades the severity or extensiveness of our daughter's disease. We kind of feel that we're pretty much in trouble, but we don't know, how we're gonna start this journey. We don't know, has anybody else, in the world have experienced something similar? How did they cope with? So we rely on Google, on Facebook, and we were very fortunate. We get to know a very small group of parents who some may think that they have that KOA disease. Some may be still in the journey actually of exploring the diagnosis. But I think the benefit is really twofold. The first, I think it was really assuring to hear, a lot of parents have had a similar challenge, some worse, and with the close collaboration with their medical community, they were able to navigate through and then, search for research advancement and trying to find, treatment option for their children, and there's some improvement. Secondly, I really felt that was important for our family from a mental support, for just more the whole spirit building. I think having a community is really making you feel not so lonely. And then it is rare, but there are people out there in this world is more or less experience similar challenge as us. So we suddenly felt that we could connect, and we felt that people could appreciate what we were going through. And I think that was really nice to actually connect with a few parents and gave us a lot of advice.
Yeah, we are actually pretty actively involved among our rare interest group at trying to reach out to various rare disease communities, particularly via the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And so it's been really, really exciting to be able to just see how sort of close-knit these communities are. I think with rare disease, it's very unique in that so little is known among medical professionals or professionals in training, that a lot of knowledge is concentrated in the hands of patients and their families themselves, which I think makes for a very unique dynamic. With that in mind,
Definitely.
I was also hoping to ask a couple of questions about sort of what you feel to be gaps in research and clinical practice around rare disease. And I wanted to start with medical students, since we do want to sort of change the treatment landscape for rare disease. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts regarding ways that we can be better to help patients and their families.
Yeah, certainly. I think, and it's really admirable for you all medical students take this journey. And now that I have been, a mom advocate for daughter with such rare disease for, nearly 8 years, I totally appreciate the level of dedication that, you guys devote to humanity. And now that I have this experience, and then I'm looking out, and then I really think that we need to grow future physicians with a clear, strong mindset of the appreciation of rare disease community. I think we are really rare, and we are costly for health system, and we are usually the type of population that present a long medical history and total chaos. It seems, everything is convoluted, and it's hard to fit into any textbook that anyone has learned at school. I think, the most important thing that I see for medical student to enter, this journey is first to recognize that, to have an inclusive society, we first need to recognize, there are different population out there, and then there are population that's extremely vulnerable and they're unique. They do not have the representative characteristics of the distribution of population characteristics that you learn in a standard medical school. And then go back to what you mentioned earlier, I think it's extremely important for medical school to really consider to have some programs and training to raise awareness of the presence of different type of rare disease, and to train future physicians and researchers to be able to kind of enhance the sensitivity towards recognize this population's existence and be proactive to think about, what's in front of me, yes, may look different, but is there something that I can do to understand and to take the research frontier to the next step so that I can support them? I think that is a still significant gap that in our current health system, I think is improving, but I think, it's not something that we're going to build in a day.
Alluding to that last thing that you mentioned, how do you think we can sort of leverage leadership and patient partnerships along with public and private funded research programs to accelerate that race towards global awareness and global improvements in the standard of care for rare disease?
I think, it's definitely important that the advancement of research and clinical innovation is the future for us to improve the care of rare disease community. But I think, the very first step is we have to listen to the patients, listen to the experience of patient family. I really think this dialogue between researchers and clinicians and family that has gone through how to cope with rare disease and their diagnosis process, how they participate in care and then research and to improve the patient outcome. That's the first step. I think we need to have that dialogue. We first need to document some positive experience, what we have learned together, and we also need to, I think, write down if certain trial and error have given us appreciation that we could avoid certain detour, we should really tell future generation of clinician and medical students maybe don't do that. I think I have had experience trying many times talking to medical students and fellows, and so what you see is not necessary because they try very hard to fit Molly into a story that they have learned from a book. And I try very hard to communicate what's in front of you is really not typical. And I think that level of dialogue and appreciation is absolutely needed to be established so that patient medical research and doctors can work together going forward. And the second part, going to what you mentioned, public and private funded research, and maybe there's also competition and challenge that we could accelerate. And that's kind of more from my personal professional perspective, because I'm an economist by training. I really believe incentive building. As we all know, it takes a lot of R&D to support any major innovation, and medical innovation is no exception. I think we have observed a lot of incredible, new investment and commitment provided by the public sectors. However, I think there is still some lag in terms of the speed and the willingness to incorporate multidisciplinary work to kind of traditional public funded research. So I think COVID-19, it's pretty devastating experience for the globe. But at the same time, I think one silver lining that we have seen is people from different discipline, epidemiology, economists and computer scientists and data scientists can actually work together to accelerate the global effort in innovation in this new identity. And I think we as rare disease community would really benefit to learn some insights from that experience. And then I think involving patient family and work together, it would be the right way to go.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zhang. These were really wonderful and thoughtful answers. And I hope that as we sort of look forward at the next phases of our training, we can hopefully put some of these lessons and implement them to just be better as a field for people and their families with rare disease.
That would be great.
So now we will have the chance to speak directly with Charlotte Kleinfeder, the KIF-1A community representative for the interview we will be doing. So Charlotte is the mom of the amazing Anderson, one of our canned superheroes. And without further ado, we're going to be asking her 2 questions. And the first one being, what are some areas of life that you feel were affected by the diagnosis, and how have you been able to adapt to them?
Thanks, Michael. I wish it was an easy answer and it would be short, but unfortunately, every aspect of our life has changed. Everything we once thought we knew about raising children. And while we have another child, Annabelle, who does not have canned, we watch her grow and get stronger and more independent. And we have Anderson, who, while certain things get easier, he gets heavier, he falls harder and has more injuries as he gets older. And so new environments are extremely dangerous for him. Outings in the community, even church and grocery stores and the parks. It's really hard for one parent to take both kids to pretty much anywhere by ourselves. We've pretty much learned that we've had to limit some of our outings to what we know is safe and avoid those areas that we just know are not safe or just a trigger for any emotional issues, not only for our children, but us, as well. There is a lot of strain on our relationships with other people, just being able to give the time that we need to our family, our friends, and just even between spouses, just being able to share that time together when we're pretty much 100% in with Anderson's disorder. And like I said, I have another child who is typically developing. And when you give 100% to a child with rare disease, it's extremely hard to give that same attention to your other child. That's a huge struggle here in our house, just being really sensitive to knowing what she needs and being able to evenly share and distribute that time and energy. I think for us, just with that little bit of additional need for Anderson, he pretty much needs one-on-one care at all times for his safety. And that has been very hard to find caregivers that we trust, that withstand through the difficult times. And thankfully, he started kindergarten this year and school has been really great with him. But that has been a huge challenge for us, just being able to find someone that can support our family in a way that we need them to, without also exhausting them as well.
Well, absolutely. I think it's very interesting, everything that you mentioned, and very valuable to hear this directly from the parent of, directly from the family of someone who's affected by a rare disease. That it's not just something you can read about and understand, but really connecting with the person directly involved is, I think, extremely valuable. So thank you so much for this answer. My second question for you here is, which areas do you think could be improved regarding your experience with healthcare teams and your diagnosis or the diagnosis of Anderson?
I think one area specifically is listening to families and empowering them, especially in the rare disease world. We know our children the best. I remember our very first time we went to see the doctor after I knew something was not right with Anderson as far as his health. And the doctor looked directly at me and said, sometimes children have developmental delay and there's no reason for why. And at this point, Anderson was walking and just falling over and falling over. And I think as a parent, you get to a place where you just push hard. You're going to push hard because you know you have to. And I knew this wasn't just developmental delay with no other explanation. So I think really listening to families and giving them a platform to address their concerns. And I think too, you know, we were one of the lucky ones to have only waited a couple years for a diagnosis. There are so many more individuals out there, children and adults, fighting for a diagnosis. And so if there's anything that we could advise or just give feedback on, is just allowing people to have a voice and using the resources available out there to help them push through that unknown. And also just more communication between the experts. On a regular basis, our family deals with conflicting advice from medical professionals. You know, you kind of lose trust and you lose that pathway of really knowing what the right answer is. And then you're just more in the dark. So if just different experts communicated, especially when they're dealing with somebody with such a rare disease, I think that would really help families along the same journey as us.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, again, that's very, very valuable insight coming directly from you, and this key aspect that it's really the patient and their family that really knows the most about what's going on. So it's very often, like you said, that things get labeled as, let's say, developmental delay, but you know, there's a lot more to it. And I think it's very, very important that we listen and communicate more, like you said. And so
Yeah,
I want to thank you again so much for your time to do this and for your very valuable insights. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we have Dr. Denise Adams, who is a pediatric hematologist oncologist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She is the director of the Comprehensive Vascular Anomalies Program, a cutting-edge multidisciplinary program that seeks breakthrough treatments and cures for children, adolescents, and young adults with rare life-threatening tumors, malformations of the vasculature, which includes arteries, veins, capillaries, lymphatics, and combined lesions. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Adams.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd love to start by hearing a little bit more about your background and the work that you're doing at CHOP.
So I am, again, as you said, a pediatric oncologist. I have been doing vascular anomalies or taking care of patients with vascular anomalies for almost 25 years. I started when I was in training because I truly felt that this was, there was unmet needs in this patient population, that they were being misdiagnosed, that we didn't really have a good classification system. We didn't know about their natural history. And because of that, we had very, very limited means of helping them with treatments. And so I specialize in new treatments for patients with vascular anomalies.
That's amazing work. Do you find that it's even more challenging within the area of rare disease to provide support to patients?
Absolutely, because you know, all of the physicians that take care of vascular anomalies, I always say that vascular anomalies is an umbrella term, and under that umbrella are many different diagnoses, or what we now call phenotypes. And each of those different phenotypes have very specific characteristics for them. And you need to know about them, and it makes it much more complicated. So it's much more complicated to me than pediatric cancer even, because if you have a pediatric cancer, you know that, I have a blood cancer, it's leukemia. I know what risk category that that patient falls into because of all the research that's been done. Rare disease is harder than that because we are a little bit later to jump on the bandwagon about discoveries.
So as the individuals are working through their own journeys and looking for resources and support, what are some of the most important ways that you find that families, patients, and caregivers can be provided support and be able to have the most resources on their own individual journey?
I think that the most important thing, particularly with rare diseases, is to find other people who have similar disorders, because everyone is very different. And I think that's where patient support groups, so patient and family support groups, come into play. When I started, when I was a very young, trainee, the first person that I had come to our clinic was someone that I called a patient advocate, but she ran one of the original support groups called NOVA, which is the National Organization for Vascular Anomalies. And I thought it was very important to have an advocate for the patients so that they knew that they could go somewhere where there were other people that had similar diagnoses, and in that way form connections and work together to really move this whole field forward. And you see that in the past 5 years, there's been tremendous discovery, not only clinically, but also in translational and basic science. And that was pushed by the patient and family support groups. If it wasn't for them and their dedication, we wouldn't have gotten as far as we are today. So
in terms of getting involved in these support groups, do you have any tips or maybe ways that patients new to the space can get involved and find ways to connect with each other?
Well, I mean, there's many different ways that they can connect now, right? Because of social media. I think they have to go to a group that suits their diagnosis. I think that's the best. But the other thing they have to remember, just as the physicians take care of an umbrella term, I think the patient and family support groups can also learn from each other. So I think, though, that the most important thing is for them to find the right group and to find a group that they feel comfortable with.
I think that's great advice. And I think my final question today would just be, in terms of getting involved with a program like ours at All Stripes, or contributing as a family, as a patient, as a caregiver, is that something that you feel is currently moving the needle or has a place in the future of treatment and diagnosis?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think for every study that we do for this indication, there has to be some natural history that we need in order to answer the questions that we have with this study. So very, very important.
I'm really glad to hear that. And I think that as we bring these communities together, your continued work is so appreciated by the individuals, certainly by the members of our team. And we're very thankful for all of the work that you're doing within the rare disease space, the cancer space, and particularly with children is truly amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to us connecting in the future as we continue to push these natural history studies forward.
You're welcome. Thank you for everything that you're doing as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rich Ellis. I am the Director of Patient Advocacy at All Stripes Research, and it is a privilege to be joined by Dr. Dominique Lessard today. Before we get started, I'd love to share a little bit more about who she is. Dr. Lessard is the CSO, the Chief Scientific Officer at KIF1A.org. Since 2018, she has been an active member in the KIF1A community, starting with her collaboration in 2018 at the Berger Lab at the University of Vermont. Beyond her scientific expertise, Dr. Lessard has a clear passion for empowering CAN families to be active partners in research and discovery. She joined KIF1A in 2020 as the CSO and currently drives KIF1A efforts to build a global collaborative research community and leads the research engagement and scientific communication strategies. Dr. Lessard, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. How are you?
Oh, I'm wonderful. It is a privilege to be speaking to you, and I cannot wait to learn more about the organization, your involvement, and what's happening in the KIF1A community. So I'd love to start by talking a little bit about your transition into the organization before digging into what is happening across the landscape. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about you and your transition and beginnings as the CSO of KIF1A.org.
Sure. I think it's so enticing to hear everybody's different backgrounds into how they came into the rare disease nonprofit space. We seem to all have these unique experiences that led us to this collective experience. And so for me, I came to KIF1A.org with an academic background. So I was functioning as an academic researcher studying KIF1A. I got my PhD studying KIF1A. And around 2018, I had a publication that was circulating around Twitter. And I love to tell the story to talk about the power of social media, and connected with KIF1A.org. Just about the publication, learned more about the organization, and was so compelled and just astounded by the rare disease community that I, while I was still in that academic position, decided to help the organization and volunteer and figure out ways that we could work together. And so a lot of the volunteer work I did before joining the team formally was focused around science communication efforts. So taking the complex technical jargon of scientific literature and really translating and distilling that into a way that is palpable to people of all backgrounds, not just high-level scientific backgrounds. After that, I was able to go to the 2019 in-person conference that KIF1A.org held, which I like to coin, not in any exaggerated way, one of the most transformative experiences of my life. Truly getting to connect to the patient community and see the intersection between science and therapeutics and the role that the patient community plays. I was so pleased to be able to make a career pivot and joined the team full-time in 2020 as CSO.
Oh, that's great to hear. And it's amazing how it starts with social media and getting involved and making that connection in person is so important. And since you started back in 2020, I know we've been living in a largely virtual world. Can you talk a little bit about your beginnings and where we are now in your role as CSO and how things have been going?
Yeah, so my first week of the role as CSO was, I think, the second week of an official global pandemic. So it was an uncertain time for everybody in terms of what does the world look like, and what does a professional space look like in this very virtual world. And for organizations like KIF1A.org, while there are certainly tribulations to navigate through in a pandemic life, there are also all of these opportunities now, having everybody so virtually connected. I know that in terms of me trying to understand what is possible based on the scenarios that were put in, having everybody suddenly in this position to engage, not only just virtually and standard colleagues that we would talk to every day, but around the world. Now we have accessibility to call somebody up in Australia, and it's very commonplace to hop on the line the next day. And so as much difficulty as this time has had, I also really try to focus on the opportunities that it has presented as we're all trying to navigate the best that we can.
That's excellent. It's a great perspective, and I really admire your approach to and the effort that it takes to connect with the rare community globally. It's definitely a challenge, and I think and it sounds as though you have made the most of it as we've sort of progressed through parts of the pandemic here. And as you spent the last 18 months getting to know the community better and on a more personal level, I'd love to ask you about the general trends and things that are happening within the CAN community and specifically within KIF1A. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about what you've learned over the last 18 months about the CAN landscape.
Oh man, I've learned so much. One of the most marked trends I see, and this is not just exclusive to the CAN community, but I can speak to that most heavily, is just the sheer amount of growth that is happening in so many different aspects of the rare disease community and rare disease therapeutics. We see this on a very inside level, operational level at kif1a.org. Our community is growing at an expedited rate, largely due to increased accessibility to genetic testing, which is the main way that our cohort is diagnosed with CAND. We're operationally growing and able to expand our team. We are growing and fostering this new network of researchers and clinicians and therapeutic development masterminds to help lead and formalize our mission from this preclinical stage that we're in right now to our first clinical trial. And then it's kind of happening everywhere. In a lot of instances, meeting with different colleagues or different organizations, sort of swapping stories and swapping common roadblocks, it seems like we're all sort of growing together as a broader collective community. And the camaraderie that can result as a result of that is really, it feels very supportive and encouraging in thinking about how we can collectively move forward in the rare disease space.
Absolutely, and I love the way that you close that right there with moving forward together and providing a path forward. And some of the things that you shared there, particularly about the first clinical trials, do provide exactly that. It's a way toward a brighter future based on the work and driven by the work that is being done globally. I want to stick with one of the things that you mentioned there about genetic testing. One of the things that KIF1A does really well on their website and as a resource is share a little bit more about genetic testing, how to read it, how to impact it in your care journey. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Absolutely. The understanding of genetic testing has so many levels of complexity. First, you have to think about just accessibility in general. When we think about creating an equitable space for people to have access to the tools that are going to allow them to get accurate diagnoses, and recognizing that not everybody's on the same playing field in that circumstance. And so how can we identify common struggles that people are facing in order to have access to that type of technology, that type of diagnosis, and how can we help break down those barriers? That's a huge part of it, is getting to them to the table in the first place. Then beyond that, so once they've joined, once they have their genetic report, I mean, it is like in another language when it's presented to somebody, unless you have a genetic background and can sift through the complexities of all the different levels of DNA to protein coding DNA diagnosis. You know, it can be really overwhelming and daunting to be presented with a problem, but not know how to understand and do something with the information that describes that problem. And so that's a lot of what we put our time and effort into in serving our patient community, is creating these resources that help take those really key, impactful moments of one's life and try and deconvolute them as much as possible. So to say, I know that you're in the situation where you have been bombarded with information that I'm sure you never experienced and never expected to experience in your life. What we're trying to do is at least help you understand what is going on in that moment so you can identify next steps forward.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the way that you provide support for families to do that from the very onset of the diagnosis. And I think that one of the things I've heard in the past is that genetic test it really is the starting point and a better understanding of where things are headed. It's almost as if you're providing someone with a map and then also teaching them how to read that so they can navigate their next steps. So I think that kif1a.org does a fantastic job of providing support to families in that way. And I'd love to shift and ask a little bit more about what's going on within the organization, because over the past years, you've been able to provide millions of dollars in funding for support and research. You have identified more than 350 patients of what may be tens of thousands that are dealing with the same type of diagnosis in more than 25 countries. So it's the progress, although it seems like it's just starting, is already quite extensive. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about what the organization is doing to continue to support the community.
Absolutely. I'd say a large focus of my role as CSO is developing a plan for a therapeutic development path in a way that interjects the patient voice as much as possible. And in a way, we're at this perfect point to formulate that path, because we are at this very preclinical. When I say preclinical, I mean really at the ideas stage of therapeutic development. So a handful of different therapeutic options a handful of different therapeutic approaches, maybe even different therapeutic targets, but all centralized around this common goal of how can we best treat and cure CAND. And based on the different approaches that we have identified and supported, there are all these different opportunities to bring patients into that process, whether it's identifying specific mutations that are going to be investigated in a therapeutic project, whether it's having listening sessions between a development team and people from our community, or whether it's thinking forwardly and thinking, how can we, when we get to that clinical trial, have endpoints and outcomes that are designed with the patient in mind, that are not only impactful on a clinical level in terms of, you know, relieving symptoms or hopefully a cure, but also are meaningful to the patient populations that we're representing as well. And over the past year and a half or so, I'd say the opportunities and the progress that we've made in that space has been really remarkable. And I don't see us slowing down anytime soon in terms of that. I think we're setting ourselves up really well to push that forward, and then also support other rare disease organizations with what we've learned along in the process.
I love to hear that. And I think one central theme of everything that you had just said really focuses on patient empowerment and family empowerment, being able to bring people in as part of a resource and an active participant in their own care journey. I'd love to kind of get your take on what you would say to a patient, family, caregiver, someone who is looking to be part of the process. You know, where do they start?
One of the most powerful things, and I hope it can be something that's empowering as well to the patient community, is really finding and using your voice. I say that because I love where I am and professionally and personally. It's just a very fulfilling place to be. And I think about how I got here, and one of the key, if not the key motivator for that role that I've come into now was the patient voice, was the loud cries and the loud demands from the patient community, that I want to validate it's being heard, right? I think a lot of times it can almost feel like you're shouting into an echo chamber, or, you know, you wonder, is anybody actually listening to what we need? And I want to communicate that what you're saying is being heard, and it's not only being heard, but it's being amplified throughout research communities, academic communities, clinical communities. The rare disease space is very, very present right now, and with the power of that patient voice, I only see that presence growing over time. So keep communicating what you want to communicate. There are people listening, and they're really impactful people listening.
Thank you for sharing that. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's especially interesting the way that you're marrying the science with the patient voice. It's, you know, we could talk all day about your expertise in the clinical space and on the scientific side, but knowing that you're hearing first and foremost the patient voice before we get to any research or anything moving forward is such an important part of being able to move the whole thing forward together. And in your listening and hearing the patient voice and helping to amplify that, obviously you're hearing some challenges. You mentioned cries and demands and things that you may have heard from the patient community. What are some of the challenges that are specific to whether it's the rare disease community, the CAN community, or things that you hear in your role as CSO for KIF1A.org?
Yeah, going off of what I was previously talking about, I think it's a challenge to identify, you know, how are we being heard, and who do we want to be heard by? You know, there is strategy to identifying partnerships, and each partnership that we want to nurture as an organization or nurture collectively as a community are going to require different approaches. And so identifying, for this specific problem, we need to partner with X, and for this specific problem, we need to partner with Y. How do we go about doing that? That can be very challenging. And that leads to another challenge, which is that we're kind of writing our own path in this process. We like to talk about out of the box thinking at KIF1A.org, but then say, actually, we need to get rid of the box entirely, because if the box or if the system were working entirely for our unique situation, then it would be working, right? And so at a certain point, you recognize we need to be writing our own path, whether that's as an organization or if that's banding together as a rare disease community and figuring out ways to identify how to overcome the unique obstacles that we face that are not currently being supported by the infrastructure that's available.
Mm-hmm. And I think that you're actually getting one question ahead of here, because I was going to ask you about the opportunities that creates in being able to hear the patient voice and work that into the process at KIF1A.org or across the rare disease space. It does present some opportunities to make change, to perhaps get rid of the box entirely and create your own structure around however you like to express creativity. And what are some of the opportunities that you've come across, whether that be because of the virtual environment through the pandemic, or just in your role in general? Would you mind sharing a little bit about what you've learned in terms of opportunities to move forward?
Absolutely. There is so much opportunity in the power of numbers, and that couldn't be more clear in a community like the rare disease community. That's really the ethos of this collaborative project that this interview is a part of, which is sharing that even though on paper, on a clinical level, two disorders or diseases or syndromes could be vastly different, touching on completely different aspects of the body, different proteins, different genes, there's still so much commonality between rare disease groups, and identifying that commonality and using it as a jumping off point to figure out how we can work together is hugely impactful and a huge opportunity for all of us as we're trying to move forward. I also think that there's a lot of opportunity in tension, as uncomfortable as it can be, whether it's conflicting hypotheses. I'm coming from the scientific background, and one of my favorite moments in some of the meetings I run is when two people disagree, because even in that moment, it's uncomfortable. It's really fostering growth in a unique way, because in that tension, you can identify some pretty novel information or novel perspectives. And that type of new information and new thinking is really what is pushing all of us forward.
Oh, I like that. Sometimes the friction can be a good thing when it leads to a productive path. So as we begin to wind down here, I wanted to give you a chance to really speak your mind about what may be happening in the community, maybe some things that you'd love patients, families, caregivers to know. Just sort of give you the floor to share whatever on your mind, and really speak to the audience, no matter who that may be.
Sure. Speaking broadly about the role that patients can play in their own therapeutic development, I do want to communicate that there is a role for everybody. Like I mentioned before, the patient voice is so powerful in this process, but even within the process, there's so many avenues that can be explored for individuals or patient communities that really want to engage in that process. And the best way that we're going to find therapeutic solutions, find cures for all of these disorders that we represent, is to bring a diversity of people to the table. And diversity of thought and diversity of background is a huge aspect of diversity that the patient groups and the patient and the families can bring to the table, as well as providing a perspective that may be absent or may have previously been absent in some cases. It's really important to understand the impact of what people are working on and how it could impact the patient community.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And I think that it really does land with patients when we say that everyone's journey is different. Every individual is walking their own path. They may be related to someone else, whether it's within the same community or the broader rare disease community, but being able to contribute and feel empowered to do so, whether it's by just speaking your voice and using your voice, or contributing to research in any way possible, is so critical to pushing things forward. So I really appreciate you taking the time today to speak to everyone, whether it be patients, families, caregivers, researchers. We're all looking to push this thing forward together, creating a better future for patients, families, and caregivers. Thank you so much, Dr. Lessard. It has been such a pleasure in getting to know you and learning more about KIF1A.org. You can find KIF1A.org at exactly that web address. You can connect with Dr. Lessard that way. I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best. Have a great day, and looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to be walking through a collaborative exercise between both groups, which we're calling the Post-it exercise. This was an exercise that KIP1A.org debuted at their 2019 in-person conference, our last conference we've been able to be together in person. And it was a really powerful exercise in which we asked our community members in attendance 4 questions, and we gave everybody Post-it notes. And they were able to physically write down their answers to these questions and then go place them underneath each question that we had tacked up on a wall. And this experience as a community was extremely impactful and really highlighted within our personal community how many of our struggles, our challenges, our victories are shared amongst each other. And so we were very, very excited when we heard from Kim that her community was interested in doing something similar.
Yes, so as a new person in the rare disease space, one of the first places I looked was the KIP1A website, and I saw their conference, and this Post-it exercise for me was so powerful and impactful. And even though I wasn't there, I thought, wow, I would have liked to have been there. And wow, we need to do this with our community. And so I reached out to the president of KIP1A, Kat, actually, and she immediately said, of course, you can use those questions. And again, I think this just points out the amazing collaborative environment that our Rare as One colleagues and the rare disease community is like. And so we set off and we sent these 4 questions out to our community too. And then when Dr. Lessard and I met and we were putting our heads together about how can we collaborate on a Science Saturday, there was that aha moment. We looked at the answers and responses to those questions, and we saw very similar responses. And that really brought out a really important fact, that even though our diseases are so very different, how many similarities and issues that our patients and families all struggle with on a daily basis. And in this exercise, we wanted to share with you and shine a light on our rare disease community.
The first question that we asked our community members in this exercise is, what's the most challenging aspect of living with your disease or disorder, living with KIP1A or a complex lymphatic anomaly? Some of the answers we received were answers such as the uncertainty of not knowing what will come next. And I think this is a common theme or a thought in not just our 2 communities, but as in the broader rare disease community as well, because many of these rare diseases and disorders are relatively uncharted territory in how we understand the future, how we understand treatment, and how we understand progression for ourselves or for our loved ones.
The next one was fear of the unknown, the future, and the life expectancy. And I can say this one really hits home for us with the disease that our son Michael has. There is currently no cure, and we really don't have very good natural history studies or longitudinal data. And these are things we need.
Pain and suffering. It's a really harsh reality for many people in our communities. And I can tell you, as somebody who entered a community previously not knowing about this disorder, coming in from a research academic background, that pain and suffering, it's palpable. You know, it's palpable as a community member afflicted by these 2 disorders, but it's also palpable to people who are joining your community, the collective suffering surrounding these disorders and all of the complexities that come with them.
Can I add, Dr. Lessard, that there is pain and suffering, and just being within my community this year, I've heard the stories, I've shared the stories, our stories, and there is so much pain and suffering. But I think what our foundations, our organizations are bringing is hope. And we have to
Absolutely.
hang on to the hope of all of us coming together and collaborating like we are today, which is so much fun. The fourth one was educating the doctors. And this one, again, I feel really super strongly about. Again, as I navigated this year in the rare disease community, I recognized that we really need to be engaging our researchers and our clinicians. There's not enough of us in the rare disease world. And so if you've all noticed, we've had our medical students here today, and all of these medical students are superstars in that they are joining with us to shine a light, raise our spirits, and learn and advocate for rare disease. And I couldn't be more excited and proud of the students who are with us here today, and thank them.
And along the lines of hope, it's very hopeful to have these medical students here today, knowing that they're the future of medicine. I mean, we've seen the great work that they've done throughout this presentation, and to know that these are the clinicians of the future is very hopeful for many rare disease communities. Along the lines of the work that we do with the medical students in this presentation are having to address lack of information and answers. And this is coming from all different areas about research, about treatment, about prognosis, really often forcing parents and individuals to become their own experts on their own disease, which is a really challenging role for people to adapt to.
The next one is the lack of treatments available and finding appropriate care. As Michael's mom, I cannot say how daunting it was when we got this diagnosis, to know that there were not treatments out there. I was told not to read because what was out there was so scary. And I think that's what motivated me to get into this full force, because we know we can do better by coming together and having a voice as patients and as families, and letting our doctors and clinicians know what's important to us. And with that information, we're going to give them so much. And vice versa. We need to hear from our clinicians and doctors about all that they're doing. And so the idea that we are working together, again, this collaboration is so, so critical, and why I find this project so incredible. The last one is, for me on this post-it, is finding appropriate care. This one's a tough one. And I think it's not just for one rare disease, but all rare disease. While we are rare, there are so many of us out there. And it's really important to get our patients to the appropriate care. And that's what we need to work on. And I think, again, bringing up our medical students, we have a really bright future, because we're going to have more and more of these great minds helping us down the road.
And once we are able to identify resources for ourselves, for our community members that we're trying to help, another additional challenge is accessibility to those resources. Maybe you've identified something that could be beneficial to you or your family member, your child, but how do you get it? How do we improve access to all these different resources, whether it be a specific treatment, whether it be a type of modifying therapy, whether it be necessary modifications in school for our children to succeed. This is a huge part of what we do as patient advocates within our respective community, to not only help people identify the resources that are going to be most helpful for them, but give them a path to make those resources a reality and find ways to make them accessible.
seeing the effects and the toll on the family. Again, a very broad statement that applies to all of our rare disease community. This is tough. But I think also having these incredible people that we surround ourselves with makes it easier.
Living with the health complications of rare disease. This is potentially an obvious point when we think about what a rare disease is comprised of, but I really think it's important to dig beyond the obvious and really try and put yourself into another one's position of how is someone's day-to-day life different than mine, because they are living with the health complications of a rare disease. And those are complications that are going to be very visible, but there's also many complications that are invisible that people are carrying every day living with these rare diseases.
Not being understood by others. Again, one that is common for all rare diseases. And I think this is a really important point to bring up, that while we are rare, Michael, take that one out. I will start again. That while we are rare, we are everywhere. And again, by this collaboration, by coming together, more people will understand us.
And lastly, an overwhelming theme when we polled both communities was the feeling of being alone and isolated, or like being on an island with nobody else there, especially when one is initially diagnosed with a rare disease. The feelings of isolation and solitude until you find your community of people who understand and who are able to help you can be vastly overwhelming. And that's why Dr. Steele and we work so passionately to help empower our communities and give new members of our community a new place to call home, a place where people understand their daily struggles, and a place where people can truly feel like they're not alone with the daunting diagnosis that they've just been given.
I couldn't have said that better, Dr. Lessard. I think all I can say is thank you to KIP1A, to Rare as One, to the 29 other organizations, and for pulling us all together. And here's to onward, upward, and lots of hope.
Hello, my name is Harisa Spahik, and I'm a fourth-year medical student at Johns Hopkins. Today, I'll be sharing with you the answers that patients gave us for one of our fill-in-the-blank questions. The question was, if treatment can help blank, that would make a meaningful difference in our daily lives. I'll be sharing with you all of these answers now. If treatment can help improve the quality of life, that would make a meaningful difference in our daily lives. If treatment can help slow disease progression, that would make a meaningful difference in our daily lives. If treatment can help alleviate symptoms or stop the pain, that would make a meaningful difference in our daily lives. If treatment can help cure the disease altogether, that would make a meaningful difference in our daily lives. And lastly, if treatment can help replace feelings of insecurities with confidence, happiness, and fulfillment, that would make a meaningful difference in our daily lives. First and foremost, I want to thank the patients for sharing these answers with us. They really provide a lot of insight to what we as part of the medical community should really be working towards and striving towards to meet what our patients want. And these answers really showcase to us that it's a wide range of things that they would like, from the very basics of wanting a high quality of life, as all of us should want. And then if a rare disease causes the life to be shorter, then increasing the time span of life is another very understandable goal that we should be working towards for our patients. And then most importantly, finding a cure for these diseases. These rare diseases typically have negative consequences. And if we are able to find a cure, then the patients will no longer have to experience these rare diseases. And then part of the large impact on us as medical students is really to continue increasing advocacy amongst the general population that rare diseases are very prevalent, even though they are rare. If you look at them as a whole, they affect very many people. And then increasing the awareness amongst medical students that sometimes the consolidations of symptoms that we might be seeing in the clinic or the hospital are actually manifestations of one of these rare diseases and not a more common chronic condition that we are typically taught on our clinical rotations is the case. And while that is how it tends to work out, we do have to keep these rare diseases in the backs of our minds so that patients who do experience these don't have to go through years and years of diagnostic tests until they find an answer. So I really just want to reiterate our thanks to the patients for answering these questions and giving us as future physicians a way to look forward and work with patients to achieve what they want to achieve.
Hello, so for this part of Science Saturday, I'll be going over the posted exercise. The topic that we were given was, I want researchers and doctors to know the following. I want to first draw attention to my Zoom background, which is a word cloud of all of your responses to the prompt, organized to fit the contours of the world map. Rare is everywhere, but we're a very tight-knit global community. I've binned the responses into themes. The first theme was caring and curing. The idea here being that a priority for researchers and physicians should be to forge ahead in our efforts to improve the treatment landscape for rare diseases. And so the responses here were as follows. 1, I want researchers and doctors to know a cure and treatment to alleviate symptoms. 2, that we need them to keep pushing forward and that we are grateful for their work. And 3, the importance of continuity of care and a multidisciplinary approach. The second theme was empathy and a listening ear. Sometimes it's okay to not know the answers, but as medical professions, it's so much more important that we be open. The responses were as follows. 1, I want researchers and doctors to know that patients and their families on a more personal level in order to address their concerns. 2, the worth and uniqueness of each rare disease patient. 3, that we appreciate honesty and empathy. And finally, 4, the pain and frustration that comes with rare diseases. I want to close with a final response, which I think really generally encompasses the essence of what we're trying to do with Science Saturday. It's this. I want researchers and doctors to know the power and will that patient communities have to help. Together we are strong, and we should feel empowered to act, to advocate, and to care for one another as a community involving patients, families, providers, and researchers. On behalf of the University of Pennsylvania's Rare Disease Interest Group, I just wanted to conclude by thanking you all for being such a wonderful and warm community. We've loved working with you thus far and are so motivated to continue doing so. It's been such a wonderful experience, and this whole thing has been just such a pleasure.
Yes, thank you all so much for tuning into the Science Saturday event, and we look forward to holding future events in collaboration with all the rare disease interest groups. You can find more information about us at raredavemcgill.com. Thank you so much.